And good morning. Here you are welcoming to Better Smarter Learning. And here today with me is David Papa, who is from the Digital Chieftain program from TNM Coaching. Hi, David.
Hi, Rachel.
All the way from?
Well, I'm based in Prague, but I'm actually in the UK right now.
Oh, are you? Okay. We could have met up and done this over coffee. Okay, but yeah, David is based in Prague, and I'm very pleased to welcome him here today talking about the Digital Chieftain program. So before we get into that and learning a bit more about the values of the Chieftain program, I just want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Passion Toolset, which permanently shifts mental blocks. And it is a toolset in a book and a mastermind, a 3-month mastermind, which is a behavioral daily change system. And it works with coaches, leaders, and learning students. And it helps coaches to supercharge their business, learning students to deal with procrastination and overwhelm, which we all have when they're with their training goals, and leaders to deal with the complicated nature of life and leadership. So thank you to the sponsor, and actually that will be something we'll be able to get into hopefully with David about the complicated nature of leading teams and getting everyone to communicate as a team. And I'm sure that's something you've dealt with a lot, David. So welcome and thank you for being here. So we'll get just into the, well, shall we get into the gist of the program, or shall we say a little bit about, because I loved your history of when I learned about you online, of that you weren't traditionally a coach and a program creator for coaching and performance. You previously worked in America. You weren't working in coaching and performance, and I think you were more digital and media industries. And you kind of had this young, not a midlife block, I'm sure it was more of a young block, you know, that really, what are we all doing this for? And having this idea of, we all go to work and we spend most of our time at work. And so I love that story. Do you want to say a bit more about how that got you to here?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks. Well, first, thanks very much for having me on, Rachel. I really like your show. I think you're doing incredible work here. You know, the emotional and mental blocks that people carry, I mean, those are the real obstacles to what we're trying to create, you know. So you have so many resources and a way for people to work through that. So I think that's fantastic. And so I'm happy to be talking about, you know, how we look at those mental blocks in the working world, you know, and people are suffering. People are in pain at work because of some of these old blocks that we're still carrying through our system, which needs to change. So that's what I'm working on. And I started the process of working on that, as you say, when I realized myself how disengaged I really was. You know, there's 70-80%, depending on the different statistics you look at, 70-80% of the world's workforce is disengaged. And, you know, especially millennials, there's a higher percentage of millennials who are actively disengaged in their work. So, you know, the younger you get in the age of the worker, the less engagement you're likely to see right now. And that's an incredible problem because, you know, I mean, of course, there are all kinds of costs associated with that disengagement. There's all kinds of, you know, there's stories of millennials just ghosting, you know, just leaving work and never coming back. You know, there's so many more errors that happen. Things move so much slower, you know, when there's lower engagement, that you're just not getting the creative ideas and the creative potential of people you've hired to do that work. You know, so I was experiencing that myself. You know, I started my career in advertising and marketing, and then I eventually just realized this was not how I wanted to spend my life. I mean, I was spending the majority of my waking hours of my life doing this work, and I was in the agencies I worked for, I was helping companies I didn't like or agree with, you know, what they were creating in the world. I was helping them get, you know, people to spend more money with them, you know, and I was like, how can I, this is my life. Like, I can't do this. So I went to business school to study how business could be a force for good. I studied leadership and social enterprise. I studied purpose-driven organizations at the master's level. And then when I decided that, purpose-driven organizations, that's the place where we can, that's how business can change the world. And I worked for social enterprise after my MBA for about 3 years, and I was a leader in that company. And it was an e-commerce company. It was actually a very successful e-commerce company, delivering a lot of value for an impact all around the world as part of the business model. But the same problems were there. People still didn't trust leadership. People still weren't showing up in their fully who they really are. People still weren't feeling like they could share their most creative ideas. People still were more terrified of judgment and failure than they were so afraid of that they weren't willing to take the creative risks that you need to truly innovate and navigate the uncertain world that we live in. So all the same internal cultural problems and really leadership problems that I saw in the regular corporate world were even existing in the social enterprise world. And I realized it's not about just having a purpose. It's about something else. It's about really the people and their own internal development, their own internal thriving, and the connections between those people, the relationships between those people. And the leaders, set the tone for all that. And that's the kind of thing that millennials are craving. That's the kind of thing that I think we need as a society to take our society forward. We need activated people in strong relationships with each other.
And I think there are, and thank you for sharing that. I think there are some examples and pockets of examples where, there is this kind of thriving, there is this kind of great leadership, and that's shared amongst teams, and that's communicated really well, and the culture of companies. And so I think there are pockets of that working really, really well. And the problem comes is, we can read stuff in the media about millennials disengaged and stuff. And I think, you're right, probably there'll be millennials who disengage, but that wouldn't mean to say that 50, 100 years ago, the sort of 20-year-olds back then would be disengaged. I think we all go through this process, in our 20s, 30s onwards of learning to find out what is our purpose. And I think it's great that people like you and I and TNM Coaching and My Pocket Coach are able to come up with blueprints for success kind of thing, that we're able to explore what works for humans, what has worked, what is working now for people in organizations and the public, and how there is this wave across social media of people wanting to make a difference and to have these companies like the ones you speak of. So can we dip a bit more into your blueprint, because your blueprint program is Digital Chieftain program, and how those ideas and you guys at TNM Coaching, how you came up with this program, and then we can start to dip into the 7 levels. So can you say a bit about that, David? Yeah,
sure. I'd love to. I actually also love to respond to what you just said, because I think you're totally right. This the millennials aren't so different. Like, there's so much negative kind of publicity about millennials, and I also feel like that needs to stop. Like, that doesn't make any sense. These people are the leaders of the future. These people are literally going to be the leaders in the next 10, 20, 30 years that are going to make big decisions to take us forward. This is a huge opportunity. These people, millennials in general, are so willing to do incredible, amazing, creative things. And most organizations are just not set up to interact with them in the way that really makes them thrive. And because there is one big difference with the 20, 30-year-olds of today and the 20, 30-year-olds of 100 years ago, and it's that they believe that their day-to-day work is an absolute key component to their overall life happiness. The whole work-life balance thing is getting blurred and coming down. Previous generations were, I go to work to get some stuff and to get some money or something, and I go home and I'm enjoying my life at home or something. And Gen Xers, for example, super happy with that. So everybody is looking for the same thing. We're looking for the way to set up our life that we feel good, that we feel happy. The big difference with millennials is they're like, if I'm going to spend my time on something, 8 hours every day or more, that thing needs to be directly connected to my happiness right now, not later when I retire, not when I go home in the evening, or I spend more hours at work. I want that to be an extremely happy feeling. So, that demand of the workplace is new, and I think that's what organizations are struggling with. So we need people like you. We need things like the Digital Chieftain that do give people frameworks to activate a different side of themselves on a more regular basis. And our framework is called the base of this program, the Digital Chieftain program, is called the 7 levels. And it's kind of a combination of the last 40 years of social science research into what really engages people and what really constitutes our needs. And it combines that with ancient spiritual wisdom about what people need to feel fulfilled. And if we can plug those things into the working world, we're going to have working cultures that completely operate on a different level.
Yeah. Okay. And do you want to say a bit more about the 7 levels? Do you want to give us the 7 levels, and then we can do a quick dive into those 7 levels?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
The 7 levels are one of the way that this model got created was we were looking at, specifically over a few years, I've been looking at all of the sources of material that talk about engagement at work. There's some great research out there, like the Happiness Advantage, Dan Pink's work, the Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence. There's some Harvard researchers who have this book called The Progress Principle. There's so many sources that went into this. Yeah, Tony Robbins even did a whole lot of research into human needs early in his career. Then there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Looking at all these sources of what people really need, what really shows to increase engagement at work. And what I found was that when you line up all the sources, there are 7 key things that that people need to feel like they're accessing in order to feel like a whole, fulfilled person. And when any one of those things is missing, people feel like there's a big problem with their situation, or people feel some type of pain. People feel some type of something isn't working for them. They feel that frustration. So that's where those 7 things came from. And and they also, when I saw what they were, it turns out these seven levels line up almost perfectly with what the ancient system of yoga tells us we need to feel fulfilled and access a deeper part of ourselves in our day-to-day life. And yoga isn't just about the postures. It's not like about movements. The asanas of yoga are one tiny piece in one limb of 8 other limbs of yoga. I mean, it's a whole system that's been also studied, because millions of people have gone through the system and had incredible results in their life. It's a system that's been studied for thousands of years for how humans can feel better in their day-to-day. So, when I saw that this modern research was lining up with the ancient wisdom, I mean, it just blew my mind. And I felt like, this is it. I have to share this. I have to talk about this. I have to, promote this and help people access this. So that's where they come from.
Your blueprint and my blueprint, we both look at the scientific part where those merge with the deeper connected levels, like you say, the ancient spiritual wisdom, the idea of something more tribal. Now, when we start exploring, because obviously this is something I'm aware of with my passion toolset, which is why I've made it a toolset so it seems more methodical, more scientific. There's words to it, because when you start telling people to sit in a room and do an Om routine, which is what we're not talking about here with the yoga, like you say, the whole yogi platform you were talking about then is more mental, as well as it's not just sitting cross-legged. But that, you've got to explore these emotional parts, because we are emotional beings and we don't make decisions based on rational facts and figures. When you're a leader and you're running a company, you make decisions based on emotions. It just is the way. It's a physiological response in your brain. You have an emotion, you make a decision. But yet, obviously, people like you and I are delivering programs like this. there is still an awkwardness attached to all of this, yet we all know it works. And obviously when you do get people, men and girls in suits, to actually go into a room for a couple of days and do a course like this, which will explore engagement and leadership and communication, and there will always be an element like this, but by the time you've got everybody to gel and connect and feel safe, which is one of your levels, you will get people to start exploring these issues. Why do you think, David, that there is this awkwardness with us as human beings when we do start to talk about, you know, emotions and you know, being able to get into connection with your deeper connections, your spiritual side? Because I still freak out a bit when spirit and even God things are talked about. I was on a dating site the other night, and this really nice guy, and then he just started talking about how much he loved God and God was in his life. And I thought, well, it's not for me, for someone who is, and there's nothing against religion at all. I totally advocate religion for people, but if someone is that deeply religious, it doesn't work with me. So why do you think, David, there's this reaction we have that we don't want to explore those more spiritual, more tribal sides to ourselves?
Well, this is a huge question and a really good one. I think many people have had really uncomfortable experiences with religion. They don't want anything to be so associated with religion. I mean, there's nothing that I would call religious in this program at all. I mean, meditation isn't a religious practice. Meditation has been well studied at this point, and meditation has a host of physiological and mental benefits that are well documented by science now, you know, for the last 20 years. So. And exactly what you're saying as well, being able to access your emotions, being able to understand what they are, you know, emotional awareness, emotional intelligence. This has also been well studied, you know, the last 20, 30 years. And we've seen how effective leaders are when they access those deeper parts of themselves. I mean, the information is all there. Yeah. Why people still back away from it? You know, there's this, it's a couple things. There are myths in our society that still persist, that humans are rational beings, primarily operating from their logical mind, and that's just totally not the case. There's a myth that the business world is rational and logical, you know, and when you walk into a business, you put your emotions outside, and you can't bring them in. That is also completely not the case at all for how any business works or how anybody gets anything done. You know, emotions can be blocks to our action, but they also can be the energy of our action. I mean, the reason we get an impulse to do our best work, where does that energy come from? That's not a logical energy. That's not, you know, you can't make a rational formula that equals someone being inspired. You know what I mean? That comes from a relationship, and it comes from emotional energy. You know, that's what inspiration is. It's a feeling. So, you know, it's insane to me that, you know, we are still trying to operate on some paradigm of that it's all logical and rational. You know, that's not how humans work. That's why people feel unfulfilled, because the whole other side of them, a bigger side of us than our logical side, isn't being addressed or accepted or used at all in our work in most cases.
And I think a lot of it comes from just the way we're grown up, and our parents want to keep us safe, so that don't run in front of the car, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other, don't, you know, keeping you safe, so that you start to become slowly boxed into a kind of category of how you're expected to show up every day, so that you show up as a certain person with a certain story. Whereas if you started just going and getting in touch with your emotions every day, then it starts to become a bit unhinged and a bit sort of, there's no control there. So I think a lot of it comes from being able to trust ourselves and trust other people, that let the lid off the brain, let the lid off the box a little bit, let the emotions out. We can still get the work done, because I think, like you say, work and emotions don't go together. You've got to take the emotion out of work so work gets done. So sorry, we can't have these consultants turning up telling you to let the lid off your brain and your emotions and your heart. And it's like, whoa, there's going to be complete chaos. But trust yourselves that you can relook at a new story every day. You know, let go of the story of yesterday, let go of the story of us as a team, let go of the story of us as a company, because that's all the, the behavioral programming, and that's what my tool set looks at, and to a certain extent it's what Digital Chieftain program looks at. So that's what I think we are proposing, and that's why you come across, the blocks in the corporate world, because it's like, well, you turn up like that yesterday, that's how I expect you to be today, and that's not really accessing the potential of human.
No. And one of the programs I'm delivering right now and teaching in, we have a statistic that summarizes the research into success and emotional intelligence. And the statistic is that 20% of your success can be predicted by your IQ, your logical intelligence that society has valued over everything else for the last, couple hundred years. But 80% of your success is predicted by your emotional intelligence. And the higher you go in organizations, the more that your emotional intelligence is important, because you're not doing so many of the tasks anymore. You're managing relationships, you're holding teams together, you're building the culture, you're giving people the feeling of inspiration and engagement. Those things are feelings. So if you're not emotionally intelligent, you're just not going to be a leader that anybody's going to want to follow. Emotional intelligence and operating from this different and deeper sense of self-awareness those are the people that inspire us. Those are the people that are going to be the ones that create the teams that take the world forward. It's, to me, that's obvious at this point. And it's, so our method, you'll just, like your tool set, our method is, of these 7 levels, are helping people access different emotional energy in 7 key ways that actually get their engagement and inspiration needs met, and help them get those the people around them, help them get those needs met as well. And so it's a process, it's a progression. There's the foundation, as you mentioned, of safety, and then it moves up from there into kind of like higher order emotions. So that's how it works.
Yeah, and it is the paradox that we do live in a world where actually, if we're able to access those emotions, like you say, the most inspiring leaders are vulnerable, do open up about their emotions, but then they kind of don't completely let the lid off. They're very sophisticated and charismatic, and they can show that side, that humble side, but then they have the directional approach. If they know where they're going, they know what the strategy is, they know how to lead people. So they can do both. And we live in that paradox of, if we could only just access that emotional quotient that we're not accessing, that's where our potential is. But then we live in the fear of, what are we going to unleash once we access people's emotions? Because there might be amongst us a couple of people who might be slightly emotionally unstable once they take the lid off the box, because that's what we've been taught to do, is put a box on it, put a lid on it. And some people might not be able to deal with the being able to express some of those emotions. And then we come into the subject of mental health, mental health in the workplace, which is wonderful that it's now being given some headspace on the TV. Companies are now making this a priority. So what also do you think about that, David, about mental health awareness? Because again, companies like to put a red tape on it and a stamp on it of, okay, and then they shut everything down, because as soon as mental health is mentioned, they don't deal with it. They just want to put a legal, kind of legislation on it, and then everyone starts to panic as soon as it's mentioned. So then we can't access that emotional potential. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, the absenteeism, and stress levels are on the rise. I mean, people younger and younger just having anxiety attacks. I mean, the mental health conversation, I'm glad it's happening. And many companies, some companies, there are a lot, look, as you said, there are lots of places where great work is being done, in this area. And there are some companies out there who take this, very seriously, and they try to institute cultural changes, like, we're actually going to turn off our email system after 6 o'clock, so that you can't you can't be at work 24 hours a day. So you actually get a break, so that and a rest, so that when you are at work, you're doing better, or just little things like that. So there are companies that just take let's just, let's offer some, free therapy sessions to our employees, versus companies who say, no, we're going to actually take ownership of this. We're going to make this a leadership capacity to create a culture where people can thrive in, where they don't have these mental health challenges, don't have as many mental health challenges. Of course, there might always be one or two people that are struggling in any situation. I mean, that's just, normal, but it's about the cultural shifts that you're willing to make that are going to create an environment where people are actually getting what they're looking for out of work, because that's what's going to make them want to stay. That's going to make them feel good. That's what's going to make them deliver their best work, which is what we all need in this crazy world that we live in right now.
But I think also it's getting this message out, which I touch upon, is this idea of if you're feeling something and it's slightly uncomfortable, that's okay. It's like the world is not Disneyland, and there's this whole big thing that I think some coaches have talked about is Disneyland and movies have caused a problem for us as people who work with other people, getting them potential out of them, because they assume that there has to be the happy ending and the story has to go through as it goes through. There's a problem and there's a challenge, and then you solve it, and then there's a happy ending. And again, divorce rates have gone up, and these things of these people are, I live happily ever together, but now there's more choice, and now there's social media, and now there's dating sites. So I think it is this idea of it's okay to feel not okay. And I think there's been books written with that same sort of title, and people just being okay that, okay, we can talk more about emotions, but then it's not just a case of talking about the emotions, it's what we then do with that. It's then how we then deal with it. And then I think you mention it in your kind of 7 levels around having an anti-fragile leader. And I'm assuming around that kind of issue, that's where you talk about that. Is it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I love that sentence. Yeah, it's so important, and most people do not really believe that inside themselves, and it causes so much extra pain. But it's okay to just not be okay. And I agree with you that a lot of leaders in the workplace are terrified because they don't know how to deal with their own emotions. Yeah. They're terrified that if we open some discussion of how people are feeling, it is going to turn into some uncontrollable floodgate, but we have specific tools and ways to handle those conversations where it's not about becoming a therapy session. It's not about that. It's just about letting emotions be part of the environment, letting emotions be seen and heard. What someone is feeling is affecting their work output. It's affecting how they're relating to people. It's affecting how they react in meetings. As a leader, you want to know this information. This is data. Emotions, one way to look at emotions are data for what's going on inside somebody, so this is a whole huge set of data that is being ignored until we make the room to have those discussions. And
the key element, which I can't remember the name of the lady, but she's quoted in my book, and she's an Australian lady and she's an author, but she says emotions are data, not directives. And I love it, because it's like, there you go, we can unleash, take the lid off your brain, take the lid off your heart, but it's just data. That let's step back, look at it, be okay with it not being okay, you being uncomfortable, but it's not a directive. Just because you feel sad, it's not a directive to then go, okay, I need 3 months off work because I feel sad. It's that whole thing of us learning to be resilient and not overreact around that, which I think a lot of employers may start to with the whole mental health awareness. As soon as someone says they're sad, oh my God, and not deal with it very well. And like you say, that's going to be down to the emotional resilience of the leader, the manager as well. So it's a lot about the safety and trust and having those really well-trained people when they're put into manager roles. What I'm thinking, David, is we are coming up to the 30 minutes, and it's been really great to introduce all of those themes. Potentially, I don't know how you feel about this, is we could do a second part to the podcast where we actually go into the 7 levels, because we literally have got about 30 seconds before we're at our 30-minute mark. And I didn't want to just kind of go, okay, so name the 7 levels, I mean, we've kind of touched on them from some of the themes we've talked about. So how would you feel if we do we can either do a second podcast where we go into the 7 levels, or we can give people a website and a contact for you, and then they can come to you, because we've kind of set it up nicely for you to then talk to people about the 7 levels.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe for those listeners who want to end here, then maybe I can just share where they can find more information, and I'd be really happy to do another podcast. I mean, these are such big topics. Clearly, we've so easily gone through this conversation and barely scratched the surface, right? So I'd happy to do another podcast about more of the specifics in how you can manage some of these things we've been talking about. But for now,
sorry, I was just going to say, one of your talks that you did on Impact Hub, which I think is great for us to maybe do a second one, is where you say words are easy and action is hard. And I think both of our blueprints, our tool sets, are based around taking the words and putting them into action, and some of the exercises that you do on your 7 levels to be able to achieve that, anti-fragile leader, that engagement in the teams, etc. So you can start to put some examples to that, maybe on a second podcast of how it actions and how it draws together the team.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'd be happy to do that. Also, I love that sentence you shared with everybody. The emotions are data, not directives. That alone can be so helpful, and people can realize I can have a feeling and not take action from it. That space between having a feeling and taking action, that's where our choice is, and then that's what allows emotions to become useful instead of take control. So I love that. I love you said that.
Yes, no, I will, if I post this out, I'll put the name of the lady who wrote the book on that, and she is awesome. So where can people come to send you a question and to get in contact with you, David?
Sure. Well, if they want to find out, look at a description of how Digital Chieftain works with companies that have millennials and millennial leaders and leaders of millennials, and see the 7 levels. You can go to TNM Coaching.com. It's the 3 letters TNM Coaching.com, and then just look for the Digital Chieftain program on the homepage, and you'll be able to see where to go. And if you have any questions about this specifically, you can certainly email me, David Papa at TNMcoaching.com. I'd be happy to have any discussions about this. I absolutely love talking about this. It's a passion of mine. So I'm happy to hear any inquiries about what this really is.
Wonderful. Yeah, and we will go offline and we'll schedule another one to kind of go into the 7 levels. But I think it's really set people up well from the context that we've given of our conversation of it that really does sort of surround the 7 levels and how people start to express themselves and what is needed for people to express themselves and build that engagement. Brilliant.
Great questions, Rachel. Great questions. And I love that you took the conversation more toward the emotional realm, because that's such a fertile ground for people to very, very quickly start seeing some differences and improvements. So, thanks very much for having me on the show, and I really appreciate the thoughtful questions.
You're very, very welcome. I think we're both on the same line. So I say thank you very much, David. And that was given to me by Obi, who I did another podcast with, and he was just going off to his yoga class, so I felt the need to thank him back. But thank you, David, and I look forward to running another podcast with you.
Thanks. Me too.
Have a good day.
Bye. You too.
Bye-bye.